there are many that you have heard about prophecy based on Daniel. There are 12 chapters of Daniel, and most of them are prophetic records. I like to study prophecy in Daniel and Revelation, but there's a chapter that I would like to discuss with you this morning, which is not, actually it's a prophecy, but not for nations, but it was a prophecy directed toward King Nebuchadnezzar, the emperor of Babylonian Empire. Now, I would begin when God teaches a lesson to the king. We know King Nebuchadnezzar. He was the emperor of Babylonian kingdom. And this story is based on Daniel chapter 4. Now, the story on Daniel chapter 4 is a story of God's love. It is a love letter to a stubborn people, especially the ones who already think they are doing just fine. So it does not only applies to King Nebuchadnezzar, but also it applies to stubborn people. Nebuchadnezzar, as we probably, I'm not sure, what do you know about this king? Or do you have any background about King Nebuchadnezzar? But Nebuchadnezzar was not a villain twirling his mustache. He was a brilliant, powerful, visionary, the kind of leader whose name is literally stamped on thousands of bricks. He was a popular king. Comparing that to our time, if LinkedIn existed in Babylon in those days, his resume would break the application. I believe that's how Nebuchadnezzar is. Yeah. He would not be able to build and raise back an empire from dust to its greatness if he's not this type of person. However, Christ or God loved this proud king enough to confront him, humble him, restore him, and convert him. He was a proud king. And Daniel chapter 4 is not just a royal autobiography. You know, the author of Daniel chapter 4 was not Daniel. It was not Daniel who wrote that chapter. It was King Nebuchadnezzar. It was his narrative. It is his story. It is an autobiography. It is a divine demonstration that the Most High ruleth, not only over nations, but over individual, complicated, and hard-headed hearts. And this is what Ellen White captures the theme of the king. And this is, I would just quote what is popular on this verse. For you know, for 7 years, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, was an astonishment to all his subjects. For 7 years, he was humbled before all the world. Then his reason was restored, and looking up in humility to the God of heaven, he recognized the divine hand in his chastisement. In a public proclamation, he acknowledged his guilt and the great mercy of God in his restoration. Now, this is actually a wonderful lessons for us to learn. I have read and studied other chapters of Daniel, but I realized that I often just skip this chapter 4. But you know, it is a this is a public proclamation and acknowledgement of the king's guilt and recognizing the great mercy of God in his restoration. And that is, when God cannot save men in prosperity, he oftentimes sends adversity. And Ellen White adds here, Prophets and Kings 521, the once proud monarch had become a humble child of God, the tyrannical, overbearing ruler, a wise and compassionate king. And under the rebuke of him who is the King of kings and the Lord of lords, Nebuchadnezzar had learned at last the lesson which all rulers need to learn. And every rulers of the world today has to learn this lesson from this great king. That is, the true greatness consists in true goodness. This is the lesson that all powerful nations of the earth, their leaders, has to learn. So this chapter reveals a truth that rulers and commoners, kings and carpenters, ancient monarchs, and modern professionals must learn. There's only one thing that this story will tell us and tell every one of us. Heaven rules and always rules. And it is our joy and not our burden to recognize the hand of the Most High in our lives. So God is not just ruling nations. God is not just ruling the world. God is not just ruling the entire universe, but he also reigns individually in our hearts, in our lives. Now let us start with the royal proclamation that is in Daniel chapter 4. So we might be focusing on Daniel chapter 4 this morning or today. And Nebuchadnezzar opened the chapter like a pastor giving testimony. And he said, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God had wrought toward me. So I started out to recall what God had done unto him. This is stunning. A pagan emperor publicly announcing the goodness of Israel's God. Only heaven could make that happen. And this section is actually one of the most remarkable historical facts in the scripture. An official Babylonian state document. This is an official Babylonian state document, preserved and translated into many languages. And God turned the king's testimony into world literature. And notice this one here. God has been good to me. This is what Nebuchadnezzar said. God has been good to me, but let me tell you what it took. Let me tell you what God has done to me. So from verse 10 to 16 of the chapter, the 4th chapter, it was shown that there was a majestic tree and there was the holy watcher. So Nebuchadnezzar dreams of a cosmic tree. In other words, it was a beautiful, fruitful, sheltering, and have global influence. This tree represents the king at the height of its glory. Yes. You know, this is the records of the greatness of the king. The tree that grows to heavens was King Nebuchadnezzar. And I remember it was not King Nebuchadnezzar alone that had this similar dream of greatness that represented by the growth of a huge tree. The Ottoman Empire, the founder of the Ottoman Empire had also, according to the story, had also the same dream, that there was a huge tree that grows from his bosom and it enlarged. And that was the Ottoman Empire. So, in other words, this particular vision and dreams is actually referring to the growth of an influence of an empire. Nebuchadnezzar dreamed this, but a heavenly messenger descends according to that. And this is what 14 verse 15 says here. And the messenger from heaven said, he cried aloud and said thus, hewn down the tree, and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruits. Let the beast get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beast in the grass of the earth. So the watchers, that is, heaven's unseen guardians, issue a divine decree. What was that decree? This matter is by the decree of the watcher, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth to whomsoever he will, and set it up over it the basest of men. You might be questioning, and saying that you might not think that such person with such a gross quality of character could be the head of the nation or the state. But remember, brethren, this word, God could set up over it the basis of men. You might agree it or not, but that's how God could work. Ellen White comments on the purpose of the dream. That is the purpose of the dream, notwithstanding the instructions so graciously given him to Nebuchadnezzar, the warnings of the past experience, Nebuchadnezzar again allowed himself to be controlled by a spirit of jealousy against the kingdom that were to follow. God showed the king Nebuchadnezzar the dream in Daniel chapter 2 that his kingdom would be succeeded, but he was jealous of those kings that would succeed over him. Okay? He did not learn from that vision, from that explanation of Daniel, from that past experience. And his rule, which heretofore had been to a great degree just and merciful, become oppressive. Hardening his heart, he used his God-given talents for self-glorification. Babylonian Empire ruled the world for 70 years, and the longest ruler of Babylonian Empire was King Nebuchadnezzar. But he became oppressive instead of being merciful. He exalted himself above the God who had given him life and power. In other words, all those success and gifts that were given to Nebuchadnezzar were from God. But the king began acting like he was God. That's when heaven sends a wake-up call rather than a dramatic one. Okay? And I said before that Nebuchadnezzar was not a villain who is always twirling his mustache. He was a brilliant guy. He was skillful general, a great leader. But human wisdom fails. Has always been. Nebuchadnezzar, when that dream was given to him, Nebuchadnezzar called his wise men They had bragged earlier. In Daniel chapter 2, they had bragged and said, right, tell us the dream and we will tell you its interpretation. Now this time, the king did not forget his dream. This time, the king gives the dream. And the wise men just blinked their eyes. Why? They don't know. Sometimes, when we are pretending that we know something, and when we don't know, actually we just, our eyes expressing that we don't know. So the wise men just blinked their eyes because they don't know. The magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. And this is the limits of these wise men. They could not, in Daniel chapter 2, they could not tell what the dream of the king was and the interpretation. In Daniel chapter 4, these magicians and these wise men could not give the interpretation of the dream. And another failure of the wise men in Daniel was in Daniel chapter 6. They could not read the handwritings on the wall. Human wisdom fails. Human intellect, brethren, to be fair, is wonderful. Right? It is wonderful. Look at the advancement that we have today. It is wonderful, but sometimes heaven's message is too deep for earthly minds. Where are the wise men today? Daniel, however, stands ready, not because he is brilliant, but because, according to the testimony of the king, the Spirit of the Holy God was in him. The mysteries of God could only be revealed by the Spirit of the Holy God. No other else. And this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. And he recognized that Daniel has the Spirit of the Holy Gods in him. So he turned to Daniel after being disappointed by the wise men. He turned to Daniel. But, brethren, although Daniel could interpret the dream, but it was not easy to reveal to the king. You know what makes it hard for Daniel to reveal to the king the meaning of the dream? You know the reason why it took Daniel time to reveal to the king what he dreamed about, what is the meaning? Because it was directed to the king. So when Daniel heard the dream, he was astonished. He was silent for an hour. He doesn't rush to pronounce judgment. He feels the judgment. Daniel loves Nebuchadnezzar. They are close. He respects him. He has served him faithfully. And now he sees that judgment is imminent and avoidable. Daniel was astonished for an hour. And the king assured him, look, Belteshazzar, that is the Babylonian name of Daniel, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble you. Belshazzar answered and said, my Lord, let the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. So this is what really makes it hard. Because that dream directs to the king. It's a judgment to the king. But this is Christ-like ministry. Truth delivered with tears. Sometimes we spoke the truth. Jesus Christ spoke the truth, but with tears in his eyes. Sometimes it's hard for us to tell the truth. Nevertheless, we have to. And this is what Daniel had experienced. He experienced this as one of the difficult moments of his life, to tell the king about his dream. And what was the decree of the Most High? Daniel gently but clearly says here, the tree that you saw, that grows strong, whose heights reached to heaven, and it was seen all over the earth. It is applied to whom? The tree, it is you, king. It is you. Thou art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown and reaches unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. It is you, it is for you. So the great train of Nebuchadnezzar himself and the decree of heaven is this. Let us summarize the decree of heaven. You will lose your sanity. You will live like an animal. You will be soaked with dew. 7 times or 7 years will pass over you. In other words, this will be your experience for 7 years. You'll be insane for 7 years. Your nails will grow like the claws of an eagle. Your hair will be like, your beard. This will be your situation. You will live among the beasts of the field. You will eat grass like them. But, brothers and sisters, this is the judgment of God to the king. But also, take note that grace has been exercised as well. Thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee. After 7 years, your kingdom will be sure unto thee. Because the watchman, the Holy One that brings the decree, they commanded to leave the stump of the roots. The stump of the tree. Put the stump. In other words, after 7 years, the kingdom shall be sure unto the king. It will be returned back to the king. God disciplines, yes, but he does not destroy. The stump remain. Ellen White explains this heaven's mercy. For months, the judgment of the king lingered. So from the time God pronounced the judgment, it took for 12 months, a year. But instead of being led to repentance by this forbearance, the king indulged his pride until he lost confidence in the interpretation of the dream and jested at his former fears. So God gave him, after pronouncing the judgment, God gave him another 12 months to consider. But the king did not change his course. But you can see here, the other side, the side of God is, he was still patient. He was long-suffering. God is still patient even in judgment. But what was the request? What was the plea? What was the pleading of Daniel? This is his pleading. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sin by righteousness. I like this passage, break off thy sins by righteousness, and thy iniquities by shewing mercy to the poor, if it may be the lengthening of thy tranquility. So this is really remarkable. Daniel is speaking to the most powerful man on earth. Yet he calls him to repentance and social justice. Only some few people can do that. Only some few people can tell a ruler that you have done wrong. But Daniel did not hesitate. God's answer to pride is humility. God's remedy for oppression is compassion. And Daniel offers to the king the hope, if it may be a lengthening of the tranquility. In other words, it may be that your prosperity will continue. It may be that God would remove his judgment upon you. God is always trying to save us. Okay? But pride will always precede before the fall. Behind the fall of man is what? Well, there's a saying that behind every success or failure of man is a woman. But behind every fall is what? Pride. A full 12 months of grace and provision pass. Whole year of second chances pass. Then the king stand in his palace roof. He was standing there walking. And the historian says maybe the hanging gardens of Babylon were likely nearby. And he declares these words. He was at ease. He was walking. He was so proud of his achievements. And the king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom, for the might of my power, and for the honor of my majesty? Still, he was so proud and boastful. He ascribed all the glory to himself. And he is not alone. Sometimes we can be like Nebuchadnezzar. Many people can be like Nebuchadnezzar, saying, me, myself, and I. I do this, I do that, I did everything. And this is what we can learn from the proud king, his proud declaration. Heaven does not let him finish the sentence. A voice interrupts from above. Before he finished the sentence, a voice came. And that was, he was transported from the palace to the pasture. Nebuchadnezzar was struck down immediately. His reason departs. He became insane. His appearance became disheveled. It was changed, His nails grows like claws of an eagle. He lives like an ox, eating grass, Sister Anna. No other, I'm not sure if someone had experienced this. So it is one of the most dramatic falls of human history. A reminder that pride is not just a sin. It is a form of insanity. And there are so many great men in the past that have fell into a humble experience. And we know that one of them is Nebuchadnezzar. And when we talk about Cyrus the Great, which is the founder of the Persian Empire, we might think that he was really great. But let me tell you that Cyrus the Great was only killed by a woman. Great as he is, great warrior as he is, but he was killed by a woman. He was beheaded by a woman himself. And who else? Alexander the Great did not die in battle, but he killed himself. He drank and drank and drank. And then fever kills him. And what about Julius Caesar? He did not die in battle. He even conquered many cities and kingdoms without any wound, but he was killed by his senators. And so many other great men that end up into the lowest depth. And Nebuchadnezzar, his story is one of those dramatic falls in the human history. So it tells us, again, I tell you, it tells us that that pride is not just a sin, it is insanity. It is a form of insanity. And this is what Ellen White says here. Self-indulgence and ambition had not yet been eradicated from the heart of the king. And later on, these traits reappeared, hardening his heart. He used his God-given talents for self-glorification, exalting himself above the God who had given him life and power. He resisted God. It's like Pharaoh of Egypt. Who is God that I should let Israel go and free them? And even here, God or Christ does not abandon Nebuchadnezzar. Sometimes God sends adversity not to destroy us, but to save us. And this is what the lessons we have this morning about Thomas, about Peter. The way God restores these disciples. In the same way, he would send a lesson and message to the king. But later on, he was converted after 7 years of living in such a condition like a wild animal in the jungle. He was restored and he was converted. And it says here, at the end of the days, in other words, at the end of the years, of 7 years, I, Nebuchadnezzar, left up my eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And this time he recognized now that it was God who is ruling the world. 7 years, for 7 years, his eyes were on the ground because he was looking for food. Now, after 7 years, he looks up, and that changes everything. 3 things happen instantly after 7 years. His understanding returns. When he looked up, his sanity was restored. When he looked up, his character is transformed. That's when he looked up to heaven. Now he blesses, he praises, and honors the Most High. None can stay his hand. And this is the transition process that Ellen White describes. Then his reason was restored, and then looking up in humility to the God of heaven, he recognized the divine hand in his chastisement. In a public proclamation, he acknowledged his guilt and the great mercy of God in his restoration. See, a pagan emperor becomes a believer. A proud monarch becomes a humble witness. A tyrant becomes a compassionate king. And this is, there are similar stories that we can hear different times. And I was telling the Sabbath school this morning about a story in one of the island. A resident there is an old fellow. Under the tree, he was reading his Bible, and there came an skeptical foreigner. And this man came to that old man who is reading the Bible, who was a native of that land among the islands here in the Pacific. And he was smiling and telling to the old man and saying, "Why are you reading that book? It is full of lies and fables." And the old man smiling at him and said, "You should be thankful because of this Bible that he is reading. If not because of this book, we would be serving you for dinner tonight." That old man was a converted cannibal. What a change, right? So the same happens to Nebuchadnezzar. A pagan emperor, he becomes a believer, he becomes a humble witness, he becomes a compassionate king. And also he gave his benediction. The closing verse is one of the most powerful testimonies in the Bible, written in Daniel 4, verse 37. "I now, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride." This is what Nebuchadnezzar said, based on his experience. And those who walk in pride, he is able to abase. It was not Daniel that said this. It was the king himself. And he proclaimed it through all the world, that those who walk in pride, he is able to bring down. For Christians, the highest place that we can reach is only at the foot of the cross. There's no highest place on earth except the foot of the cross. That's the only highest place we can go. So the king urges all nations to trust the God of heaven. Ellen White says here, under the rebuke of him who is King of kings and the Lord of lords, Nebuchadnezzar had learned that lesson at last. And rulers all need to learn that true greatness consists of true goodness. And look at when we compare the life of Christ on earth. He was great, but what makes Jesus great on earth? He was good to all people. Right? He didn't have wealth. His parents on earth are poor. They are working in the carpenter shop. And he was not a politician or a wealthy person or a scholar. His followers were just humble peasants and fishermen. But what makes them great? What makes them great? What Jesus makes great? Because he's good to all people. And what made Peter great? Was Peter really great today? Well, could you imagine, brothers and sisters, in the Vatican, the statue of Peter is being worshipped by the intellectual persons in Vatican. That statue of Peter, a fisherman, is being worshipped by popes and prelates and cardinals. True greatness consists in true goodness. So the lesson for today that we can draw from this story, it is not an ancient history, it is present truth. We have to treat this story as present truth, not just ancient story, but a present truth. That God rules over nations. You might believe it or not, but he is ruling all nations. Not only that, he rules over our lives. Pride still destroys lives. God is patient with us. Restoration is always possible. Yes, these are the lessons from this chapter of Daniel 4. God rules over nations. Kings rise and fall. Empire come and go. Policies change, of course. Economies shift from good to bad, or from bad to worse, right? But Daniel chapter 4, verse 17 stands, the Most High ruleth. What else? God rules over lives, your lives. The King of Heaven is not only interested in nations, he is passionately committed to individual hearts, even stubborn ones. And number 3, pride still destroys. Pride says, what pride says here? Look what I have built. Look what I have accomplished. And look at me. Me, myself, and I. There's 3 of us. But humility says, look at Jesus. Look at Jesus, the cross. That's the highest point that that every one of us could reach. God is patient with us. Number 4, Nebuchadnezzar received repeated warnings, miraculous intervention, and a full year of grace. But what happened? If God can be that patient with him, with a Babylonian emperor, he can certainly be patient with us. So probably God does not only give us what? A year, but many years, brothers and sisters. And that is the same. How many years did he give to the antediluvians before the flood? 120 years. God is still patient with us. In 1833, the believers who believed that Jesus would be coming in 1844 proclaimed that he would be coming in the year 1844. And how many years now we're still preaching that God is coming? God is patient with humanity. So restoration is always possible. Nebuchadnezzar fell into such deep and miserable situation, but he was restored. Thomas was also restored. The Apostle Peter was also restored. The disciples were lifted by the grace of Christ. Restoration is always possible, no matter how far we fall. Mary Magdalene, a prostitute, a harlot, was restored. A harlot in Jericho was saved. God can restore our broken lives. God can restore our broken heart as well. So, what we need is to look where? Look up. Look up. At the end of this journey, Nebuchadnezzar lifted up his eyes. That is the turning point of every life. Look up. Lifted up his eyes. Ellen White says here, we must today seek God and be determined that we will not rest satisfied without his presence. This is what we need, the presence of God with us. Like the lesson this morning, Thomas was doubtful. And he said that if I could see the wounds in his hands and his feet and his side, I will not believe. He was doubtful. He didn't even believe that Jesus was resurrected. But he came to the right place. He came to Jesus. And that's the only right place we can go. So, Nebuchadnezzar's story ends up in what? In worship, not in warfare. In humility, not in arrogance. His testimony, not in rebellion. That's the end of the story of Nebuchadnezzar. And your story might end in a different way. But let it end in good, like Nebuchadnezzar. As the only thing that it ends in good is if we what? If we look up. Let us stand with the king who once stood against God, but ended standing for him. And together we can say with these words, I praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. This is to be the language of our hearts as it was the language of King Nebuchadnezzar. And may this language be with you and each of us this morning. Amen.